Welcome to the Membership Guys podcast. Kick-ass advice and tips for membership site owners.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 62 of the Membership Guys podcast with me, your host, Mike Morrison, one half of the Membership Guys. This is a show where we talk all things membership website related. And in today's episode, I'm talking about making the switch from selling one-to-one courses over to selling memberships. More specifically, what sort of things you need to think about, what you need to be prepared for, and what kind of changes you may need to make in your mindset and your approach in order to successfully make that switch. So the first major change you're going to experience if you're moving from one-off courses to memberships is, of course, the change in the revenue model. So typically when you're selling a course, you'll have 3 or 4 really focused, really intense periods of promotion where you open that course up for enrollment, you conduct all sorts of marketing activity, all centered around the course only being available for a certain number of weeks or a certain number of days. And that's something you call the launch cycle, where you're constantly launching it, closing it down, leaving a little bit of time for students to pass through it, ramping up your marketing efforts again, opening it up and rinsing and repeating. And what that does is every time you launch, it gives you a big injection of cash. But that leads to having a peaks and troughs kind of situation where all of your revenue comes in one lump sum. And then for 2 or 3 months, you might not be earning anything at all until you open the doors back up for your course. So that kind of model has its weaknesses, it has its problems, because what happens if you have a particularly bad launch? Maybe you were counting on some key affiliates who were there last time who just can't show up for you. The timing's just not right for them this time around. If you have a bad launch, that can actually cripple your business for the next 2 or 3 months because you are so dependent on these big cash injections and you have nothing really going on in the gaps between opening the doors for your course. So the big change you're going to experience when you switch over to memberships is that you'll no longer have these injections of cash, but what you'll have instead is recurring revenue, where you have smaller amounts of ongoing monthly revenue that accumulates and builds over time. Now, this is better on a long-term basis, gives you more stability, gives you more predictability. It gets away from having this peaks and troughs kind of cycle where you are so dependent on having a good launch period and you're leaving yourself vulnerable to kind of bottoming out if you have a bad month. But obviously in the short term, that means you're not going to have these big injections of cash, and that can be a bit of a challenge to transition to, especially as your new membership is just sort of warming up and just picking up momentum. So of course, a way of addressing this is to have a launch event for your membership. Now, some people employ the launch cycle for memberships as well, but for us, in most cases, you're kind of getting the worst of both worlds because you're restricting yourself and locking yourself into this peaks and valley kind of model without the huge cash injections that come from selling a $2,000 course. If you get 1,000 people buying a $2,000 course every time you open your course, and you open 3 or 4 times a year, then that's 2 million every single time. But if you're not selling a $2,000 course anymore and you're still using that launch cycle for your membership, then the actual amount of that cash injection isn't enough to justify being closed. There's all sorts of negative knock-on effects of having that sort of model as well that we won't dive into. We have covered in a past episode, but suffice it to say that realistically, for a long-term sustainable membership, you're going to want to be always open. You're not going to want to be closing your doors, relaunching, closing your doors, relaunching. However, when you first switch from selling one-off courses over to running a membership site, you absolutely want to have some sort of launch event that's going to give you that initial injection of members, which will make that transition and that change in revenue model a little bit easier. The second thing you need to think about if moving from courses to membership is whether or not you want to bring over your existing course members. Now, sometimes that might be a good idea because that gives you initial momentum. If you have a community, it gets people actually talking, so any new members joining aren't coming into a ghost town. But what you really need to think about is whether or not you're going to allow those existing customers to join your membership for free, or whether you're going to ask them to join on a paid subscription. Now, if essentially all that's going into your membership, at least within the first few months, is the exact same course someone's already paid for, then you're probably going to allow them in for free or for an extremely low price, because otherwise you're charging them twice for something they've already bought and they're not going to go for that. However, if the course that they purchase is just one small part of a much bigger, much more substantial offering, then you're definitely going to want them to pay. What you're likely going to do though is offer them some sort of preferential rate, some sort of discount where you are technically grandfathering in your existing course customers into your new membership and giving them that discounted rate almost as a thank you for the fact they bought the course from you in the first place, but also by way of sort of an apology for asking them to re-register and rejoin up to another site. So the particular approach that you take with this really does depend on how big a factor what someone's already bought and paid for is going to be within the new membership offering that you're putting together. Now, of course, whichever approach that you do take, you will get some people who don't want to sign up for your new membership. So you need to think about, for those guys, how are you going to allow them to leave and to part ways with you while still taking what they paid for. What you really don't want to have happen is having to maintain two separate websites, one for your membership and one for the course customers who refuse to come over to your membership. So you want to give them a way of being able to walk away with everything they paid for, being able to download any course videos, any workbooks and what have you, without having to access a separate website. So if they're not going to join your membership, you need to make sure that there's some sort of plan in place that enables them to get everything they paid for without you having to keep running a second website. And usually that is just going to be a case of providing them with downloads for everything that they bought. So they can take it away, download it and save it on their own computer, and then it's entirely up to them what they do with it. You're no longer responsible for giving them a platform that they log into in order to access what they bought. One big thing to prepare yourself for is that the methods of marketing that you're going to use for your membership will likely be very different to how you've marketed and promoted and sold your one-off courses. Again, if you're selling courses, you're likely to have been doing the launch cycle type of approach. Maybe you've been using scarcity and urgency and lots of promotions based around the fact that your course is only available for enrollment for limited periods dotted throughout the year. And as we mentioned, there's certainly ways in which you can incorporate that same sort of approach into a recurring membership. But in our view, and certainly in our experience of testing this against having an always open membership, being always open just makes a lot more sense on all fronts in the majority of cases. So you're not going to be using that kind of launch cycle approach. Instead, you're going to need a consistent lead flow, and that comes from ongoing slow burn activities like content marketing, like continuously nurturing your mailing list and so on. So if that sort of activity really isn't where your strengths lie, and if your strengths lie in things like making use of this kind of scarcity tactics, things like heavily relying on affiliates and so on, and having all of your marketing really heavily concentrated in short bursts, then that's going to require a significant change of approach, a significant mindset shift. And that may actually be a reason why switching to the membership model isn't for you. Because if you're great when it comes to leveraging scarcity to sell, if you have a really strong army of joint venture partners and affiliates, then that's going to make things more suited to the course model where you're doing this sort of launch cycle. So certainly something you might want to consider when thinking about moving over from one-off courses to the membership model. And finally, one of the things that most people making that kind of switch don't take into consideration is that when you're running a membership site, all of a sudden you need to start focusing on things like onboarding, member engagement, and retention. When you're selling one-off courses, essentially once someone's made the purchase, your job's done. That's the finish line. With memberships, when someone makes that initial purchase, that's the starting pistol. That's when the real work begins, because you need to keep them engaged. You need to make sure that they're onboarded and they're assimilated into your membership community, that they are put on the right track, they form the right habits, they're kept engaged with your membership, and ultimately they stick around and they continue paying you month after month after month after month. Now that requires a completely different set of skills, a complete different mindset, and that really changes the complexion of what you're going to be doing day to day in terms of your strategy and your tactics for your membership site versus selling one-off courses. So when you're running a membership site, you need to have solid strategies for onboarding, engaging, and retaining your members. Because if you're not retaining, then you lose out on that recurring revenue. So this is the biggest thing you need to be prepared for, you need to be aware of, and you need to have a strategy in place for when you're making that jump from selling one-off courses and one-off products to putting all that together and running a successful membership site. And remember, not everyone is right for membership websites. If all of your strengths, your resources, all of your experiences are geared towards selling one-off courses, and you're already been successful doing that, then there's a very good case to be made for sticking with what you're good at. Switching from a course to a membership site isn't just a case of semantics. It's not just a case of making a few tweaks and rejigging a few things. It's a major mindset shift. It's a total change in how you're going to market and promote your product. So really think hard if you are considering making that switch as to whether running a membership site is going to be right for you. And hopefully this episode will help you make that decision. Thanks so much for choosing to spend a little bit of time with me today with the Membership Guys podcast. I'll be back again very soon with another episode. If you've enjoyed today's episode of the Membership Guys podcast, we invite you to check out the membersiteacademy.com. The Member Site Academy is the essential resource for anyone at any stage of starting, growing, and running a membership website. So whether you're still figuring out what your idea is going to be, or whether your website is already up and running and you're just looking for ways to grow it and attract new members, then the Member Site Academy can help you to get to the next level. With our extensive course library, monthly training, exclusive member-only discounts, perks and tools, and a supportive, active community to help you along the way with feedback, encouragement and advice, the Member Site Academy is the perfect place to be for anyone looking to start, manage and grow a successful membership website. So check it out at membersiteacademy.com.